Adina Merendlender is a professor of conservation science at University of California, Berkeley in the Environmental Science Policy and Management Department. Adina started the California Naturalist program and served as its founding director, which to date has graduated over 4,000 certified California Naturalists. Building on the success of this program, she helped start the first public education and service program on climate stewardship and co-authored Climate Stewardship: Taking Collective Action to Protect California. That book, her latest, has place and purpose all over it, as it includes a foreword written by Greg and is illustrated throughout by Obi. Adina is an internationally recognized conservation biologist, known for land use planning, watershed science, and landscape connectivity, and we are proud to have her on today's episode. This is Greg's first time meeting Adina face-to-face, although she and Obi have worked together on many occasions.
We're live again. Oh my gosh, we're live from the top of Sonoma Mountain, place and purpose, with the great Adina Merendlender. So grateful that you're here today, Adina. This is so much fun. Oh my goodness. We have an ecologist, Greg. We finally have an ecologist joining us.
Well, in all fairness, I think we've always had ecologists. You and I are ecologists.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
But we have one who teaches.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And she's a real field researcher. I think I would say I'm more of an ecological philosopher. You know, the love of wisdom. I would say that I'm chasing the story. I don't fully have the whole story. Do you have the whole story?
No, I don't think any of us have the whole story. The complex systems.
Only the Great Spirit or God does.
Oh, for sure.
Or maybe AI in a few years.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we can go there. Do you want to go there? Gosh, it's been so long since we've sat down together, Greg. Yeah. It's been like 5 weeks since our last.
I know, so much has happened.
Because
we did it earlier.
It's such a joy to join you. I'm just tickled pink, as I would say.
Yeah.
December 2023. We're inside today. Our lovely friends, the ancient laurel trees, are just out of arm's reach now as we are anticipating a good winter soak here any minute.
It's all green too. It's nice.
And frogs.
Oh, you've been hearing the frogs.
When I came in about an hour ago, there was plenty of frogs in your little depression.
All the multicolored tree frogs, which are pretty unique to this area, are all singing. They're happy, singing the rain.
What colors are they?
Everything. You've got them blue, green, brownish, stripe. They all have stripes, but reddish. They all come in different colors.
Huh.
Yeah.
Huh.
They're tree frogs.
Is that something that happens throughout the Sonoma Valley Wildlife Corridor? Or is that just here on the mountain?
It's at the preserve. It's one of the only places around where they exist, or where they've seen them of late. But they're here, and many up there at the Fairfield Osborne Preserve at the top of the mountain, where of course Coyote created everything. But they wander down here, and they're in my garden and all around. So
yeah. Well, you spend most of your days in Hopland.
Yes, I do. Where we are recording chorus frogs and trying to bring back the red-legged frog, which used to be in our perennial ponds, and which is also part of the Myakama. So for those who are not familiar with Hopland, it's north of here, but we're part of the same mountain chain.
Red-leggeds up here. Yeah, and the Fairfield Osborne Preserve, and the waters up there. Yeah.
What is the little watershed up there in Hopland?
Yeah, we're in the Parsons Creek watershed. Okay. It drains into the Russian River. But the mountain chain is really connected, and bringing back the connectivity between the Upper Myakama and down here at the terminus is a really important effort.
How long have you been working on red-legged frog populations, and how is that going?
Well, like much of my work is responding to a student's interest. So there was a graduate student years ago who noticed that he was working on coarse frogs or tree frogs, and he noticed that there weren't any coarse frogs in our sort of deepest, most long-lasting sort of perennial pond. It's a sag pond created by a
that's what we have here.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not that common, where you actually can, the water holds year round. And that was because of invasive species that had come in, the largemouth bass and the bullfrog. So we're just in the process of trying to restore that ecosystem.
Yeah. The process, it's not a destination. It's not like someday it's going to be restoration is here. Right. You are always attempting to augment native biodiversity, right, and to eliminate stress vectors that are a century or more old.
Yeah,
right?
I think at Hoffman, for me, it's partly just trying to leave the place better off than I found it, which of course resonates with a care and reciprocity philosophy, and why I'm also so interested in Indigenous stewardship, right? So it's just about taking care, really, and stewarding. And there was a clear need that these particular ponds needed some stewardship, some good fire, some invasive species removal. So that's, part of what we do, right?
Yeah.
One of the things, speaking of invasive species, that it was actually pretty hard on the frogs are cats, domestic cats, because they play with them and kill them, and they've killed the impact of cats and pets in general is horrendous on indigenous species.
Yes.
Since I've been here, the people who lived here before had dogs, and since I don't have dogs or any pets for that matter, but that's just allowed everything to move back in just on these 3 acres here on the mountain. A bobcat, I was talking to Angela on the phone, just watched it below my window, walk around. They're all around, everything's come in, including the quail are coming back to nest. They figure out these places to come where there's not cats and dogs, and so it's pretty interesting to watch. And of course, I'm old enough to remember, even in Santa Rosa Creek, the salmon run when I was a kid, the steelhead that were in the creek right below there, 4th Street and Farmers Lane, all of the things that were here when I was a kid that aren't here. There was an invasive species there were many of them, the pheasants, the Chinese pheasants, that ringneck pheasants that were here. You don't see them too much anymore, but they were here. And there were no turkeys in those days.
Right.
That's
They
new.
were introduced.
And they're all around here now. I've seen the proliferation of the turkeys. So it's interesting to watch.
I've always been so enamored with your work, Greg. And I just love hearing about your experiences for many, many years in this area.
You're getting old.
But you also have an incredible memory, and you write incredible narrative. And for me, I just want to say that reading your work, whether it's your own recounts of your youth in Santa Rosa, or your sharing wisdom from Mabel McKay, or your sharing stories that have to do with how this mountain was made, and animal story, and all of those things have helped me to connect with place, and to connect with this mountain range, to connect with these watersheds, to connect with the town, the city, everything. And I just think that's an incredible gift. So thank you, because I read as much of your work as I can.
All we do, any of us are doing, including this podcast, is simply continuing the stories that not only recall the life that was here and can be here again, but ways to think about that life and ways to be here. I think as we're today more than ever, we're need to put 2 feet on the ground. And I've always questioned, what does it mean to be home? What does it mean to be safe? And only when you're safe and when you have created a home, maybe we can undo the us, them, and create a we. As long as we're not safe, there's going to continue to be an us, them. And so those are a lot of the big questions that I've had, and I'm drawing on a lot of what the ancestors told me about, my elders told me about places and how we work things out here. But, it's going to be, we were going to face, obviously, climate challenges. But as I was telling Obi, I was just at APEC, and in fact, I was the premier host, as it turned out. And so, I met all the great world leaders and all that, but nothing, Adina, and I told Obi this, was as shocking and eye-opening as when I co-hosted a dinner with Mark Benioff at the 61st floor of Salesforce for Prime Minister Trudeau, where I found myself at a table with all the top AI folks. And I left that table thinking that I had been living in a cave for 40 years. And I'll just sum it up because there's so much to talk about here. But it's really got me thinking about so much of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. Trudeau, we all went around and said what each of us excited us. I was talking about nature, and they were talking about, operating on single cells. What Trudeau said was, summarizing what happened, he said, we're in a transition in human history that we never have seen or could have imagined. Historically, regardless of culture, we have always done things to one another or done things to nature. For the first time ever, things are being done to us. Things are turning. Now things are going to be done to us with AI. And when you think about the ramifications of that, and how quickly this is going, in fact, the last 2 weeks, it's more news, unfortunately, than the climate disaster, or COP28 for that matter. But he also aligned that with the political situation. He said in times when people lose agency, they always, and we know this historically, align themselves with dictators or strongmen.
It's a fascinating connection.
Yes, and for a politician who's a leader of a country to draw that connection was shocking and eye-opening. And as I said, I left that dinner thinking, oh my God, how do you begin thinking about those things? What does that mean? And what does that mean about the things we're doing? All the three of us here, the things that we consider so important, and how is AI going to affect the things we do? Perhaps positively or negatively. I mean, now there's this, artificial generative intelligence where the AI is thinking, and Sam Altman, I believe, is in a kind of war with others to finally get the hold on the human chip that totally imitates the creative human mind.
And that's
well,
scary.
if it gets me off my computer and lets the computing do whatever it needs to do while I'm outside, I'm in.
And I mean, you're kind of regent right now, right? And the other thing I just read is that next year, all UC 10 campuses, all students will have access to AI, so that, and you've probably read about this, think about this, Obi, so that they can speak a text or feed a text to any one of these programs or apps and create a movie. It'll generate images of the whole story. It'll create a movie. In fact, somebody just created a movie about AI. It had AI create its own movie. So what does that mean when students, we were worried about chatbot. Did they write their papers? Now they can make movies. Mm-hmm. And from movies, they can also generate texts. Wow. I retired from teaching a couple of years ago, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you're still doing it. What is this going to mean? Are they going to come up with solutions to a lot of the environmental issues that we're dealing with? So I don't know what you think about all that. I mean, you're
takes
still
me
there.
To rapid change, right? Change.
Yeah.
We're dealing with rapid anthropogenic climate change. We're dealing with change in the tech sector, and it's very difficult to forecast exactly how we are going to have to respond to these rapid changes, right? Like, I don't have a...
But it brings it back, doesn't it bring us all back to that question of place and purpose, home? How do we take care of home? I mean...
And not lose agency, especially over our environment.
Exactly.
Because I don't think that AI is going to, the question will be, is it for profit? And generally,
it was interesting because one of the people at the table said that now they have satellites where they can track all the methane that's coming out, even out of a single cow's nose. I mean, that's how specific it is. They can work. but they didn't talk about what they're going to do about methane. So,
right. Well, scientists are really good at tracking things. We like to checklist and track and monitor
things,
all the greenhouse gases going up. We're really good at that.
They'll also be able to track that. All the countries apparently that have been lying about the amount of CO2 that's going up, now these satellites can tell the truth.
Yeah.
But
I
then,
mean, can we put it in the hands of communities, foster their agency, and have them go out and say, we're putting a cap on this one. It's right near our neighborhood.
That's really well said. That's something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Well, what does stewardship mean today? How is it manifesting today? I think you're an example of this. The Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, who sponsored this podcast, thank you. You being in the 61st floor of the Salesforce Tower, which is, and I showed my art there once, and it's an incredible place to be. You're looking down on the Transamerica Pyramid. You're
looking down on everything.
You're looking down on everything. It's really as high as you can get in the Bay Area in some sort of man-made structure. It's really an impressive thing. And this is for APEC. And for those of you who don't know, it's Asian Pacific Economic Conference. So you're engaging the world in these global economic forces as a voice for your people and as a leader of your people. This is the scenario that you're describing to me doesn't necessarily fill me with terror. I think that there is a place for artificial generative or general intelligence to rise up and to give, especially in the hands of ecologists. Mm-hmm. AI represents unprecedented tools, a portal towards the synthesizing of data on a level that is exactly what we need to face the problem of the single cow's carbon emissions, for example.
Go ahead.
Well, absolutely, in the sense of collecting information, synthesizing information, right? You think about all the wildlife cameras out there now. We don't have to have graduate students identifying the animals. The AI does it for us.
Yes.
But again, I think it goes back to something you were saying, which is that we can gather information, can track information, we can generate new information. Some of that new information seems spot on that AI is generating, and some of it seems really off and, fabricated. But I think the real question then is, what are we going to do with that information? Or even if AI is the decision maker, which I think is where you were going, is it making decisions in a individualistic, neoliberal economic, direction? Or is it considering the collective? And how do we, not let it just accelerate forces of evil?
Well, I think the question, not to be reductionist here, Adina and Obi, but it's something that you said, Obi. It depends on whose hands it's in. It's in whose hands. And that will be the question and how it's programmed. But there are incredible opportunities that it can do, identifying soils and places to grow certain things, how and where to get water for certain things. All these things that it can do, which I'll say is maybe one of the reasons I'm having a meeting with Chris Larson, the CEO of Ripple, Tuesday night. I'm having dinner with him. And for some reason, they're interested in us and what we're doing, the models that the tribe has created here. But again, if there's an opportunity to do the right thing, I think all of us need to get in there with our knowledge, with our values and what we've been trying to do, and say, work with us. Work with us.
Yeah.
Because as a friend of mine said when I was describing all of this, he said, well, Greg, and I was telling him I was going to have this dinner, and he goes, well, Greg, I guess if you can't beat them, join them. So,
Okay.
So, it's just amazing. And you said, Adina, so well, I'm spinning because so much is happening so fast. And, as a leader of a nation with resources, it puts a huge, I would like to live in this here. But with opportunity comes immense responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
and to do the right thing in a world where not everybody thinks the way you do. So it's interesting. It's fascinating, and it will say a lot. But again, back to the thing, I want to go back to a quote and get philosophical for a second. I want to think of what the poet Gary Snyder said. There's more information in a square inch of a redwood forest than there is in all the libraries in the world.
That brings us to Obi's work, I think, so much, right? In deep observation of even, the way you'll blow up a small organism for us on the page sometimes and really bring it to life.
Thank you, Adina. Thank you. Dr. Kaufmann, my father's son, was going to be a mathematician. My father said to me early on that mathematics is the language of reality. Of course, he makes the outcome of which is a painter and an artist, because I've spent my life rebelling or testing that theory about the bedrock of perceptual reality inside of the phenomenological universe, because I can't get over the idea of beauty. And beauty to tell a generative story towards what those values might be. And if there ever was a moment of intense sort of schismogenesis within the anthropos, the big pressure of the human with all the cows, the cats, and the dogs upon the Gaia. It's almost as if we have this mythology of these two great creatures, right? The Anthropos and Gaia, who are wrestling, even though Gaia now is only about 4% of the entire biomass of the planet. Anthropos is about 96% when you consider all of the weight of all of the humans and the cows, and the pressure that it is on the biosphere, on the lithosphere, on the atmosphere, on the hydrosphere, right? As we're talking about these arenas of intelligence. And the bifurcation from human intelligence to artificial intelligence, that giving away of that agency is perhaps the terror, especially in this political age. I realize I'm going from beauty to politics, but I think we need to go there when, as Trump announced on Hannity the other day, that on day one, he's going to close all the borders and he's going to drill, baby, drill. This is day one of his policy, right? So shoring up what we need to do as a community in light of that possibility, a community on whatever level, a community of thinkers, artists, scientists, leaders, towards this better story that we're trying to tell. And that's, I think, where your work is so brilliant in the certification program. Now that we have the California Naturalist certification, we have climate stewardship certification, both through UC Extensions.
Correct.
And now your emphasis, Adina, is going towards indigenous modes of stewardship and ecological
and
knowledge.
Community.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think building community
community,
very much. And I think there are lessons in listening to Native voices and also in helping us connect and come home. And when Greg was talking about our responsibility, where we direct our privilege, right? I mean, I just like hanging out with Native community members, and I think it would be, if I can help, and it helps not really the right word, if I can collaborate in a good way and advance some of the things that they would like to see happen, I think this world will be a better place. So that's where, the California Tribal Naturalist course comes, and we're working with the Hopland Band.
You were just doing some work in Tahoe with the Washoe, is that right?
That's right. That's right. We're bringing back for the second time a course that the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria helped sponsor our scholarships in our first round, and Greg and Angela are involved in that. To facilitate an opportunity for a tribally led, so tribal community leaders and traditional people that hold a lot of traditional ecological knowledge, sort of configured the California Naturalist program with Indigenous ontologies, right? And then this is Native people learning from other Native people with other Native people. So it's a different kind of class for sure.
Indigenous
And
ontologies.
we'd
Ontology
like to hold
being the study of why
How you-
things are at all.
How you understand the world.
How you understand the world.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right.
Right.
Yeah. When animals were
What you've
people.
constructed as a, yes, when animals were some people. I mean, a very different ontology, as I've said, from the Judeo-Christian tradition, where there's this linear creation, is our creation, where you have Coyote as what would people see as the god, being basically a fool in many ways, even though he created everything. So consequently, when you have that kind of creation story, it positions you as a listener and as a living person in the world to constantly be thinking about what you're doing and being reminded that by being greedy or thinking about yourself, you're going to be foolish. And that's very different from a God and a hierarchy that tells you how to do and what to do, rather than to think constantly for yourself and put you being totally responsible for everything you do. It's the inverse. Again, we believe that, everything here had power. And you've heard me talk about this before, and I've certainly talked on this podcast about this. But the whole notion that even a rock or a stone or everything had power, and if you violated it, it will come back on you. And so, I mean, I might be a good person, but if Adina, stole something from me or harmed my family or was greedy or dominated me in some way, her mother might drop dead the next day because I had songs and I had protection. And that's why here in California, physical warfare was considered the lowest form of power, because if I had to go out and, for instance, hit Adina, I would indicate to everybody around me that I had no power to get back at her. And therefore, they could just take me out without recourse.
Yeah.
And so you were, again, the ethnographers and anthropologists always talked about us as being cultures predicated on black magic and fear. No, we were cultures predicated on profound respect for one another. Hence the word, as I've written about, palachai, miracles. Like we call the old people used to call the white people miracles. And I said, why? And they said, well, when they were coming here and killing everything and killing people and damming up the water and killing animals and chopping down the redwoods and doing all of these sorts of things, we always believed if you did that kind of thing, you would get punished. And instead, more of them kept coming. We thought they were miraculous. But as you and I, the three of us sitting here today, know, it just took a little while longer. It's all come back. We're all poisoned. There's not a drop of air. There's a breath of air, a drop of water that isn't poisoned today.
It's just a temporal scale.
Yeah, it's just if the elders could have just lasted a couple more generations, they would have seen, oh yes, it's coming back on them.
Absolutely.
So the moniker miracle could be synonymous with something like unnatural, right?
Yeah, or against nature.
Against nature.
Rather than with.
Anti-natural,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And the way I see people that I work with on Indigenous stewardship, so those just collaborators in this space, show what you're talking about in their expression is often to acknowledge the tribal community and the effort of community ahead of themselves and come into space very humbly. You can imagine how that is not the Western science ontology.
Which Adina comes back to everybody that,
Not the way I was brought up. So I'm working on unlearning
that. And notions of power. Mabel was always seen, and Essie Parrish were always seen as people with power, but that was from a Western point of view. What they had to do was a total surrender of the ego. The spirit told Mabel, you're going to do what I tell you or I'm going to kill you.
Yes.
You're only here. And as Mabel always said, I didn't want to be an Indian doctor. I didn't want to do these things. I wanted to drink wine and chase boys around the train station like the other Indian girls. But the spirit said, you're cut out different. If you don't obey, I'm going to kill you. And it was doing that. And when I'm done with you, I'm going to take you back. So again,
yes.
and here, I messing with these things, I remember going to UCLA And everybody in those days, this is how old I am, they were reading Carlos Castaneda. And so everybody was coming up to me and, expecting me to have a vision on the spot or something. And I thought, these crazy white people, I've been trying to get away from this crap all my life, and they want to get into it.
Yeah.
Because it was heavy and dangerous and thoughtful. And the reason a lot of these things haven't been passed down isn't because the elders didn't want to pass it down. They were fearful that people wouldn't be responsible with it and misuse it and harm themselves and others.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well,
It's
that's
very interesting. I've heard some people refer to themselves. I was just up with Washoe communities and reminding me we are private people. And I think that gets at what you're talking about.
And it's not that we don't want to share. It's what actually we want to protect.
I got that sense of protection.
Yeah. Older people would I don't know why they were picking on me as a kid, probably because I was such a mess, but they wanted to give me a lot of bad or difficult things, and Mabel that I could do things to people. And Mabel said, no, don't do that, because you're going to have to live with that. It's living. All these things are living. So, again, to turn it another way, I think when you said your father, Obi, about mathematics, but then there's quantum physics that doesn't have numbers. It's waves. So there's that alternate.
Well, there's lots of math in quantum physics.
Yes, but I mean, it's still waves rather than units in some ways. And so, and of course, I go back to what the great Irish poet Yeats said, and I've quoted this before: this pragmatical, preposterous pig of a world would vanish on the instant if the mind would but change its theme.
Changing its theme. That's wonderful. Sitting here with you for...
Yes, I would like to change our theme about the world and about place very, very much.
I think that's what we're all trying to do.
Maybe AI too.
In my better moments, I think maybe I'm doing that a little, I hope.
Yeah, I think that...
Well, you're helping us do it. So I don't know where you're at in your process, Greg. I bet it's very far along, but I just want to say you are helping us do that. And I think Obi's work, when you read Obi's books and look at his art and digest what you bring to us from your observations, and really grounding in the natural world, is hugely helpful for switching our theme, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Adina. Yeah, I'm all about unpacking these thoughts, and sitting here with Greg for a year and a half now, it really, really occurs to me how the idea of paradox is intrinsic to thought patterns in Indigenous culture, in ecological thought, in so many ways. I mean, even as we're sitting here and we're talking about the miracle of escaping natural karma embedded in a colonial process somehow is a paradox of thinking about learning. You just said, I'm unlearning things. You have to unlearn in order to learn. Even, on an ecological scale, even in terms of fire stewardship, I'm writing a book on fire now across California. It's like the more fire there is on the land, the less fire there is on the land, right? The more fire there is on the land, the more resilient the land becomes to dangerous fire processes getting out of control, for example.
Unless you had the great herds of animals that ate the grasses that grew as a consequence of the fire.
Oh, for sure.
And had grasses that didn't promote fire, but were rooted. Right?
The bunch grasses and so forth,
they had
purple needle grasses and things like that. Yes.
Yes.
As I like to remind people, the Golden Hills of California is a very recent phenomenon.
Yeah.
Because, and again, one of those things, those Mediterranean oat grasses that have taken over everything. Of course, now we're getting the star thistles that are even driving those out. But they suck the water, shallow rooted. They suck the water. So the deep rooted grasses that we had could no longer drink. It also dropped the water table here incredibly.
And they were golden for a short period of time, which was thanks to the wildflowers.
Yes,
it was a little tiny period of gold in the wildflowers.
Yes.
And,
it was the flowers that were gold.
Yes, exactly. Not the grasses.
Yes,
exactly.
And
right. So there, what you're describing is like cascading effects of invasives across different ecologies.
I was wondering, Greg, being connected to this land for as long as you have and being as observant as you've been here, have you noticed a drying of the soil animals? I mean, in the sense you've been across the Laguna de Santa Rosa. I mean, talk about change.
Yeah, it's been unbelievable. Unbelievable what I've seen and witnessed just in my lifetime here. As a kid, I was seeing the tail end of the land dominated by orchards and dairies, but there was still a lot of water. There were apples. Yes.
Was the soil almost wet in the Laguna when you were
Oh, it was very
like
wet
spongy?
and marshy. I mean, it was dangerous. In fact, we would go there and we'd always, as kids, talk about it as being like, be careful of the quicksand because you would sink down. The other thing is where there's the lake, Spring Lake over here behind Lake Valfine, which they've dammed up. But when I was a kid, that was all active springs, just springs. Water bubbling up. And the big thing is if you stepped into there, one of those springs, you'd get drowned or go down. It was fascinating. Springs and caves where water was coming out of the caves. I remember all of that. It was magical and dangerous to walk around. And of course, then I found out the elders said that a lot of those cave waters connected to the Russian River and connected underground to everywhere. And be careful because you'll get sucked out and come out in the Russian River. I mean, they used to tell us stories like that. But as it turns out, as Mabel McKay always said, whether you believe it or not, it's true.
It's true. No, absolutely. It's all connected. If you're a water molecule, you would be going.
Yeah, but I didn't know as a kid. I that was a story, and so I was terrified. I watched or I walked because it was all marts of the lagoon and all the area around it, and Spring Lake area now they call it Spring Lake. It was open grasslands that were marshy, and so you would walk through those, and during the winter it would become like a lake, but the rest of the year you had springs. In fact, here still, if it rains a lot, and Angela, you've seen this, when you go to the bottom of my hill here, when it rains a lot, there is a place where the water gushes out of the ground 5 feet high continually because there's rivers or creeks underneath the water that fill up and it just shoots out of the ground. And so even in the summertime, there were these areas that Laguna and the areas that I'm talking about where we hiked around as kids, you would see the springs and they were clear water, just beautiful clear water where, you had to pay attention because there would be sedge and things and you couldn't just run because you would go down into a hole. So you had to be very careful as you navigated around these springs. And they were the size of this table. They were this big, the water coming out of the ground.
Right. And for those who don't live here, it's much drier now. Obi, you wrote a book on water.
Yeah. I mean, they don't, now there's.
How did you deal with that? You know, that the hydrological processes have been so manipulated. I recently was asked to give a lecture updating some of the climate steward instructors about some of the more recent climate science.
Yeah.
And that's a lot to ask for a 40-minute lecture. So I took it through the lens of water.
Yeah.
I think that what we see here is we can observe so much change when we think about water. And then
I could have written a book on
plants,
groundwater. Speaking of deep roots, you cut your teeth as a doctoral student examining the interface of wine culture.
Oh, right? Let me get started on that.
I know Greg and I share this.
I'm old,
when we're talking about
and all of Sebastopol in that area, I picked apples there. It was apples, and apples didn't take the water.
Yes.
In the last 30 years, since they've taken out all the apples and planted grapes, people's wells in water-rich lagoon area Sebastopol are going dry.
Yeah. So I actually started that work in vine ecology when I first arrived at Hopland. So I see. Oh, okay. I am also an old person, so we can go 25 years back, and I was still on the faculty. No problem. And that was something that really hit me in the face. Think mid-90s, when the huge wine boom in California, right? We got some, gold label wines in France. Suddenly, everybody had to have more and more Californians started drinking wine. It was this confluence of having more reputable and quality wine along with more wine drinkers, right? So then we go into this huge extractive boom. And that just hit, I worked on land use when I arrived at the University of California. So, if you work on land use and you come to North Coast in the sort of mid to late 90s, you're just, all you see is a lot of conversion of habitat to vineyard. Yeah. And then it got into, so first it was habitat loss, and then it was water. And the demands during the dry season. So, talking about the difference between an apple tree and a vineyard. So there were just huge demands during the dry season. And people went to the quickest and closest water of their creeks, and juvenile salmon suddenly didn't have habitat because, believe it or not, fish need water.
Yeah, right.
So it went from there to many aspects of
which ties
vineyard
us to
development.
Politics, because still to this day, vineyards unregulated use of water. Nobody else but them here in California. So, and boy, you talk about that, and those lobbyists will hit Sacramento's, like.
Our work was on the cover of the Press Democrat, that's a local Sonoma County paper, and about some habitat loss. And one of my colleagues at Davis said, Adina, by next week, the university's going to reassign you to measuring peaches in the valley. You are so done. And I have to thank some of our ag advisors and other people at the university who did not send me to Central Valley, but worked with me. And it was an interesting ride. There were times when grape growers were getting up and giving lectures on the models that I had developed because we wanted to store more winter water for them, use less water during the dry season. So there were some win-win solutions out of my lab with grape growers, but there was a lot of me trying to sugarcoat poison pills to them, sort of saying like, but I don't want to see any more loss of native shrublands, and I don't want to see, I want to keep you in the agricultural footprint, and I want to have you store a little more water in the winter so you don't de-water in the spring. There's lots of strategies I was trying to work on at that time.
It's creeping
but
up
it's
the
not
mountain.
Easy.
When I moved here 15 years ago, it was all cows down at the bottom. As you leave at the bottom, it's all vineyards. It's creeping up the mountain.
Oh, yeah. We've lost a lot of hillside native habitat and created a lot of habitat loss and fragmentation with that kind of agricultural expansion for sure. I just think it's interesting to reflect a little bit on doing science in an extension format. It's all about, can you realize some transformation, some change that's needed, right? And when it's a win-win, like you're advocating for ponds that growers want, then everybody's like, yay, we love Adina Merendlender. And then when it's, but I don't want you cutting any more oak trees or any other native vegetation, and no more land clearing and, all of that, then it's not so, they're not singing my praises, to say.
Yes,
it's and I'm sure you see that in your own work.
Oh my God, yeah.
When everybody, we've come up with a solution, everybody wins and everybody's got more in their pockets. Let's go. But when it's a solution of restraint, it's harder.
It's interesting because, again, with the Point Reyes, we have the co-management agreement, precedent-setting co-management agreement with the federal land. But the different groups, they're dealing with a lawsuit situation down there now, which we're not directly involved in. But there are people that want us to tear out all the dairies, get rid of everything, and just let the elk proliferate all over the place. And then you're against the dairies. So again, depending on what you're going to do, you're going to have all these forces cheering for you or not cheering for you, which goes back to, I hate to be very basic about this, Obi and Adina, but we got to work together. You can't just get rid of all the cows, because then you're going to immediately, because then what are you going to do about the grass? Can we do enough controlled burning out there? Because there's a lot of grass out there. And then, of course, I always laugh. I said, so many of these people that just want to tear down all the fences and all that and let the elk grow. We don't have the predators, the grizzlies, or as many cougars. Wolves are coming. But these liberal folks down there that just want all the elk everywhere, what will happen as soon as a cougar eats their dog or is in their backyard, or a grizzly bear chases one down the road?
I don't think the folks in Mill Valley want grizzly bears to return.
No.
Right? Yeah. And if we were to establish some sort of Pleistocene Serengeti across the steppe of Point Reyes there, it is all pasture grasses now.
Yes,
right.
yeah.
And pasture grasses, being Eurasian in origin, want to burn every year.
Yes,
That's what they're. That's
Who
how they're
doesn't
evolved.
love a good Marin cheese, right?
Yeah, who doesn't love a good
or
Marin
a little
cheese?
bit of
Yeah.
good wine, yeah. And I think it's really building relationship, working together
In a democratic
agree.
context, in a community context. But here we are, beginning of December. The rain is now falling, and it is storytelling time. I'm hoping that we can solicit a story from you, Adina. Now that we've talked about some of your early days, if we could pivot towards the thing, which is the California Naturalist certification, which you were instrumental in lifting up. How did that come into being, and where did that come from in your heart and mind?
I think it's like a lot of callings. The first time you hear it, you go, "No, not me. That's too much."
I can relate to that.
Yeah, right. Like all of us.
No.
No. Spirit's calling, and I'm saying, "No, not me. I'm Jonah. I'm gonna go into the whale before I." Like, there's a lot of story on that.
Yeah.
But so there were a few people, but I guess the primary driver is that we observed, and I think that's key, that whenever we would offer classes about natural history at Hopland, that they were packed, and a lot of different types of people from all walks of life have this insatiable curiosity about nature. They're offering about mosses or sedges, and so it was pretty clear that at least the people that we knew really wanted to learn more about natural history. And other states have naturalist programs, so we didn't come up with the whole idea ourselves. We were able to really benefit from Minnesota and Florida and other programs, and just launched into it with some other folks. Some folks went off in different directions, and I got kind of left hand holding the ball, and then my name was already on it. So I was like, okay, we got to see this thing through. And we were able to start a new unit within Cooperative Extension for the California Naturalist program, which is a pretty different twist for UC Cooperative Extension, which tends to be, a little bit more on the agricultural side and also on the sort of like woodland range, kind of thing, more commodity oriented. This was really, for folks who just wanted to learn about nature. And since then, we then leveraged that program to start the climate stewardship program, which was an interesting twist because that also is a different kind of calling, right? So one was swimming downstream with nature lovers. Who doesn't want to do that? Like that was, pure pleasure, right? I had been swimming upstream against the current with Vineyard folks, right? Yeah. Like it was just, most of my work was like land use change stuff. No, we don't want to have, paving over nature. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then, so it might have also been a time in my life, our values changed and things. I probably was ready to swim downstream. Yeah. And I thought, this is fun.
Or needed to.
Yeah. Right. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so many people helped in the naturalist program. It was just an incredible village experience to create that program. And it continues to grow, and there are over 6,000 strong, and there's so many different variations. There's a bilingual program in the desert. There's, the tribal one. There's the Wishoyo, with Chumash. There's, the variations on the naturalist program are just wonderful to see. And it's just grown terrifically, and now we are redoing the handbook. So
when can we expect the second edition of this one?
A couple of years out. Yeah, we're redoing it now, and then how it takes a year in production.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
And
how great!
This is a real. The naturalist handbook is a real reference book.
Yeah.
You can look everything up in the back. It's terminology, things like that. We will try to do even more narrative the next round, more diverse voices. There's things we really want to do with that book. The facts haven't changed in the sense of how the geology of California hasn't changed, the water systems and things like that are in there. When climate stewards came around, so we always thought folks also want to do something about climate change. Yeah. They're frustrated that nation states aren't really doing anything, right? They're not leading in this space. And so we did realize that communities wanted to do something about and take action, right?
Act locally.
Yeah, act locally, get together with others. We realized that it's not an individualism got us into this problem, and it's not going to get us out. So counting your carbon footprint, it's nice to walk the talk.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't want to use less plastic bags or whatever? But that's not what this program's about, right? It's not about one-upping each other on individual action. It's about working together through collective action, which I think is also resonates why I mentioned the collective in Native communities as well, right? So it's a collective activity. And the book, when we did when we start these programs, we often get a bunch of folks who know what they're doing in a room and talk it out, right? Kind of come up with a strategic plan for something. And when we did that process for Climate Stewards, thanks to a very generous donor, we were able to get some folks together and talk about what would be the approach to fostering agency around climate change in California. And one of the first things folks said in the room was the book cannot be a reference text on climate change. We've got a lot of that out there. It's changing every minute. You know, what we really need is hopeful stories about what people are doing. We need to inspire people to feel they can do something about this. And so that I immediately needed a collaborator on, because unlike you both, the narrative does not come naturally to me. So I was fortunate to work with Brendan Bueller, who's a pretty funny, tight narrative writer and a funny person. So those are stories on purpose, and they're show not tell what people can do.
Right. Okay.
And that program has just skyrocketed as well. It's sort of interesting within the dynamics of the folks who work for the two programs and our staff, because the original staff were having so much fun swimming downstream with butterfly nets that the idea of doing this, sort of more and more labor, it's emotional labor, right? Yeah. Climate change, there's a lot of emotional labor. There's a lot of strife and, getting over your climate grief and all of that. And I think we were all
the action
shocked
is
how popular
getting
it
over
is.
the grief. That's the action does do that.
Yeah.
Action.
Yeah. But for folks, they were sort of like, oh, we've got to take on climate change. But now it's so popular, and it's wonderful to see. We have all the Climate Corps members. So, we have core programs getting certified in this area. And watching what everyone does within their own communities after they take the class, the projects they're engaged with, that's where the joy comes in for sure.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I know you both are active in the sort of food sovereignty realm and food shed. The idea of the food shed, the idea of locally growing, a different attitude towards food industrialization and food production and food distribution. Greg, you just came back from APEC, very excited and inspired to dig in on that level, huh?
Yeah, because on one end, I heard all the AI stuff, and then of course all the political stuff, but I also heard talks, fireside chats, and others from world leaders who are talking about addressing the climate disaster via food production. Yeah. And so there were a lot of interesting talks, which kind of resulted in me jump-starting. We just purchased 40 acres adjacent to our casino resort there, which we have land all around it, but so that from an organic dairy. And so the land's already deemed organic, because he's been raising organic cows there for 10 or 15 years. And so we have a small garden already, a couple acres, where we're growing enough produce for all our elders. We deliver boxes of food, of the organic produce, to them every week. And then every Thursday afternoon, I think it is, all Indians in the community can come and get free produce from us. But that's the first phase of and now we are growing enough so that we're putting it in the team dining room, where we have a team dining room for our 2,200 team members down there, so that all the produce in there is coming from our garden. But we got this 40 acres, and so I've got our CFOs and everybody getting together and talking about, let's do a major plant in production. What do we plant? How do we grow this? Because it was estimated in talks I've had with a lot of these folks at APEC and so forth, with 40 acres, I can just about produce enough produce for Sonoma County.
The entire county.
Almost. Yes.
Yeah.
Because you can, if you do this right, it's unbelievable about the amount of produce you can do. And what that does, it will, no matter how much we do, each step of the way will stop the carbon footprint from the corporates having to drive the food and fly the food in, the blueberries from Chile, for example, in the middle of winter, all those kinds of things.
The water footprint too from the Central Valley, say?
There you go. And of course, when you've got a beautiful green cover, you've got right away a carbon sink. So it's a win-win. Also, we will be able to employ, and this is going on the air, undocumented people and give them the same wages and benefits that we give the people in the casino, which will, just as the casino undid the hospitality industry here, which exploited the Latinas something awful in the hotels and spas and so forth. When we raised the salaries and gave them all food or in benefits, it raised the bar. Many of the vineyards exploit the workers, something terrible, expose them to pesticides and everything else. We will employ them, and that will impact, they'll all be coming to us, that'll impact the workers who've been exploited in the vineyards.
Yeah.
They were going to have to raise their standards too. So it's a big win-win-win-win, and I'm really excited about that.
I'm excited about that too. And I think the other benefit you have is that we still have natural vegetation in and around the farm to supply you with bats that will eat your bugs, and
we have the
birds
whole incredible thing, because the land is very close to the tail end of the laguna.
It
right
makes
there.
A huge difference
And,
in the work we can do together.
Yeah,
with
it's
all
so
of our
exciting.
community of life, because they're partners, and that's the nice thing about organic agriculture, right?
And
Is you're
we've got
fostering that.
The flowers that we plant
relationship.
with our the gardens that we have now that bring all the butterflies and insects and everything that eat the things you don't want, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, this kind of farming, this kind of diversity agriculture, organic agriculture is a huge climate solution as
Do you
well.
have stories like that in the book? You know, that almost sounds like a story that could be in your book.
Absolutely,
Tell us some stories from the climate stewardship book.
Well, what I think is interesting is our context is here in place in Sonoma County and Southern Mendocino County in an oak woodland environment, grasslands and wetlands, and all of that affords us.
Yeah.
And then I think a bigger challenge can be in an urban setting, right? How do people, let's say, in the perfect example from the book is in Watts and near Jordan Downs, right? Talking about East Los Angeles.
I love that story.
Yeah, where Ava Post-Coup is doing her work with Mudtown Farms.
Yeah.
Right? So thinking about that same, I think, theme as we were talking about, or ontology that we were talking about early, right? Like, Ava Post-Coup falls right in with Greg Sarris. It's just sort of an interesting thing, is that they're coming from such different places, but she is very embedded in place. She does soil remediation because that's what's needed in those soils, right?
Yes.
Those are, and walks around to different homes. I mean, I don't have space in the book to share everything, but they go to different elders' homes in Jordan Downs, and
Read
they ask,
the story.
do you need it? Would you like a garden bed? What would you like in your garden bed? We're going to come with volunteers and build that garden bed. We're going to fix, put in better soil for you. So those are sort of home gardens. And then also, like you were talking about, bringing food in so that there can be a free farmers market style market that everyone can go to once a week and get the fresh food that they need. And that's saving food waste around the Los Angeles area, and just all kinds of collective programs and education programs at Mudtown Farms. So, and one of the things I'll just close with on the food thing in the book is that the food stories really resonate with audiences, readership. When I give talks, everyone wants to be a gleaner. Everybody wants to have a garden. Everybody wants to talk about food. So it's a good connector around climate solutions.
It's something also that they know they can do, that's possible. And then, of course, the amazing thing that we hear from many of our elders and stuff, and the people who've had to live on commodity foods and so forth, and people who've just been shopping in Safeway or wherever, they go, my God, it tastes so good. A tomato tastes like a tomato.
You're bringing real joy to
Yes,
that.
yeah. I mean, and it's spreading. As Mabel used to say, if you do good, you'll get good. And it's amazing. One of the things we do want to do is sell a lot of the produce at cost in low-income neighborhoods as a way to spread the message. And then look at the ways we can connect with a lot of the things that you're doing and others, because once people start eating and getting that food, guess what? They can grow it for themselves.
Yes. And if they live in an apartment, and we hope in so many ways these days that everybody's living a little tighter together, there's, these resurgence of community gardens, right? And ways probably that people could come to your farm and experience that. They don't have to own the land in the sense of don't have to be living on the land. They can be living.
We have garden days, just on the land that we have, so that tribal members and friends can come and work, And they love the kids come. We also have chickens, organic chickens that run around that lay blue and green and pink and coffee colored eggs and all that. And to watch the young kids go get the eggs and be out in the garden, it's just so healthy.
Yeah. And I think sometimes I think about gathering, and now about more Indigenous food gathering and families and people like Bernadette Smith, who she carries forward so much connection with Oaks out and Manchester Band. And one of the things that Bernadette does is when she's gathering, she always makes it about families gathering, children gathering, mothers gathering. And I think that's also true in the Latina culture, right?
Very much family. Everything's so family.
Veronica Miranda's in the book, bringing families. She says you just have to be human to come on her group, and she brings people out and does, invasive species removal, trail work, garbage removal in the city and around San Francisco and the North Bay. So I also think that's something that, resonated for me when you were talking is we need to stop thinking about naturalists as people with necessarily just people with a journal and a pencil and and a certain prescriptive way of being,
studying non-human communities, right? The human community. I can't help but think as I listen to you talk. You two talk about health of the body, of the community, of the land as being all analogous and parallel to one another in structure and form, as if the physiology meets the physiography somehow, as if we are a reflection
until
of
recently, relatively recently.
Well, it seems like you're leading the way towards a truthful reconciliation, a reckoning of these justice issues. I mean, how strange it is that we import so much nutrients, right? And that we do not build it in our endemic systems across Sonoma Valley, for example.
Well, it makes me again just remember what the great Kashaya prophet Essie Parrish said in the late 50s, when a lot of us were, wanting to get cars and do those things, and were bitten by the bug of materialism and that sort of thing. And she said, you young people, all the things that I have, you're just leaving them around on the ground like clothes. You're just throwing them down. And she said, there's going to be a day when the white people are going to come back to us and say, help us. What can we do? And she said, you will have left your clothes on the ground and you won't be able to help them. Pick up those clothes and remember
incredible
what
wisdom.
I'm teaching.
I want to ask you about that, Greg, because it's something that I've run into and struggle with, which is as I try to learn more myself about Native communities in California, and I think it does help me to connect with the land and connect build relationships. But when I sort of refer to Indigenous stewardship as sort of, let's say, I'll say something like Indigenous stewardship is very, very critical to climate resilience in California, something like that. Yeah. And sometimes I'll hear a little bit of a pushback of sort of, oh, now you're coming to us. Like Kai Lapina going like, oh, now you want me to solve all your
everything up and you're about to die and now you want me to save you.
Yeah,
yes.
and you know what? And now suddenly, you know.
Yeah.
So I just want to know your take on that, because and I think I sent you both this idea of like, I was trying to write myself a list of ways in which I might be a good ally, because I do believe the statement that I said about Indigenous stewardship as being very, very critical. But then how do I do that how do we be good allies? And there could be lots of different opinions, but I'd be curious on
Well,
your
I
opinion.
think, first of all, just in terms of approach, is respect and listen. So often, whether it was the anthropologists of the past or the ethnographers or the environmental or the hippie movement or the environmentalists now, they're always coming and telling us what we were and what we are. You were this, you did this, you understood the land, you walked around naked and in peace. No, we didn't. Listen. I think it's a lesson for all of us, and remembering the history that each of us carries. But the bottom line, and these are big things that we can talk about, but the bottom line is that, and I preach this to my own people and try to get them, remember, so many Indian people, like so many people in poverty, we've never had the freedom, the luxury, the privilege of thinking tomorrow because of colonization. How do we eat tonight? A mother has said, where am I going to get enough flour to make fry bread for tonight? And so part of the culture is a culture of panic, a culture of the moment, a culture that's defensive. So how do you begin to get us to get past that and understand, and I say constantly to my people, we're all in this together. In fact, most California Indians are mixed with European blood and all of that. If it can get along in our blood, it's got to get along elsewhere. We must work together. We need each other. The sun is not going to discriminate against you because you're white, Indian, black, white, gay, straight, whatever. The environment, as it always has been, is the great leveler. And we've got to remember that. We can sit here and have these big discussions about ethnicity and how we're going to approach this or how we're going to do that. But unless we come together now, those discussions are going to look like a tea party in a hailstorm in 10 years. Mm-hmm. So let's imagine the 10 years and what can we do to at least be holding hands at that time.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's what we have to do.
We're quite literally having a tea party in a hailstorm right now.
But this is a beautiful one.
We're grateful for the rain.
But this one's reminding us that keep talking about the right thing. Rain's a good thing. You know, when the old Indian people used to say, if a good person dies and there's a lot of rain, that's a good sign. I remember both Essie and Mabel said, when you bury me, we're going to die, both of us, in the hot weather. But the day the coffin goes down, there's going to be a downpour of rain. And of course there was both times. I mean, here Mabel died on the 31st, I believe, of May, and she was buried in June. And it was a hot day, and we dug the grave, and just as the coffin was being lowered, downpour of rain, puddles, I mean, just rain all over the place, and red lightning in the sky. And then at the sky, as soon as the coffin was down, there was just an opening in the sky. And all I could keep thinking is hearing Mabel say, whether you believe it or not, it's true.
Reminds me of that fog story you read about too, right?
Oh, yeah, that's Mabel. I mean, her, yes, driving up there and singing that song and a tunnel opening up. And, you know, she gets out of the car and she goes, gee, I guess the song still works, don't it? And we get in there, and Essie was lying in the schoolhouse up there. She was not ill. She was ill, and Mabel was going to sing for her. And, you know, she said, sit down. She didn't even know what happened, or I didn't think she knew what happened. She said, sit on my bed next to me. She said, whether you believe all these things are true, you got to listen. You just saw something. Pay attention. So
yeah. And it really resonates with also this importance of observation, right? Listening is one of our senses in which we observe. And I think when you asked about the naturalist program, it was also like our goal is to help people to deepen their ability to observe. And that, comes along with also listening to Native communities and Native people. And I keep thinking about your work too. Do you feel like that is the offering that you give, is deepening our ability to observe nature, to understand what we're...
I would hope so. Again, thank you. You've been so complimentary. Now, certainly there is a lot of conservation ecology as a construct imbued in my work, but the celebration of biodiversity must be there too. And that's what I hope to espouse, right? This celebration of not condemning to death that which is not yet dead.
Well,
right?
I think your drawings, your artwork there is the beauty of that. There's the words and what you say is one thing, but juxtaposed with the beauty, the colors, that's joyful.
Joyful. That's exactly right. In practice, thank you. And I often wonder about the conciliation between these two, great schools of human thought, whether we're talking, whether you believe it or not, it's true. The colonial mind versus the indigenous mind, the scientific mind versus the artistic mind, all these different realms that we attempt to balance in the sense of identity. And I almost imagine something like an ecological psychology or neurochemistry somehow, where I imagine analogous forms in my mind of how thoughts come together in the landscape. Like, for example, there's this thing that happens when two ecosystems come together and overlap inside of this ecotone. You get this thing called the margin effect, where you'll get greater biodiversity within this thin bit of habitat than you will in either of the singular habitats. Individual
in the ditches outside the cornfield.
Exactly correct. Exactly correct. Yeah. And so too does it happen when you have the unity of human thought, right? Between and it makes it's no surprise to me that processes in our minds and in our brains, the way that we account for data or information at large, in our sensorial consciousness, how we account for that can be analogous to ecological concepts on the land. In that regard, we could keep going.
We can do that on connectivity too, right?
Yeah, connectivity. That's your second book. Here we are. Just make sure that we go touch on all your whole portfolio here. Corridor ecology, linking landscapes for biodiversity conservation and climate adaptation probably is my favorite of your three books, because it is the most, probably because it is the most conceptual. It's the most applicable, especially as we go forward in 30 by 30, which I know you are now state law. 30 by 30, we will conserve and protect for the express purpose of biodiversity.
I want to say, and steward, which is much harder.
Thank you very much.
That is on the map.
That is steward. Yes. That is an inextractable point that is absolutely necessary for this conversation. But 30 by 30 and the co-management agreement with tribal sovereignties across the state, which is part of that mandate, but it's not just about the quantity 30%, which is a criticism towards Sacramento as we proceed, right? In this policy, it's not just about the quantity. Mm-hmm. It's about the quality. You don't just draw a circle around a space and call it protected, because that in essence is creating some sort of violent
extinction. And also, as we know, if you put a fence around and call it protected, the quality goes down.
Exactly. It withers, right? It needs the connective living sinew, right? That circuit.
Absolutely. I'll put a plug in for the California Biodiversity Network for anyone here who wants to engage. It's all welcome. Everybody welcome.
Wonderful.
If you want to get involved with the vision that 30 by 30 sets out, as well as just what I would say is conserving biodiversity, but I'm now going to adopt Obi's rubric of celebrating biodiversity. I am a conservation biologist by training, And so I've always thought that my ought is to conserve biodiversity, but now I realize that it's really to celebrate biodiversity, because it's what we've been talking about, right? If we're not interconnected with nature and interdependent with one another and in community and in celebration and joy, then there's not going to be any non-human relatives left.
Isn't that interesting? You know, as we sit here and I think of like my relationships
Well, there
in
won't be
my
any
life.
humans left
You know,
either.
But since I want to celebrate the biodiversity
Yes.
part, that's what I'm
Like
championing,
I cherish my friendship and my relationship with you, Greg, and it's like, but I don't think of it in terms of like, oh, I have to save my relationship with Greg. It's like, no, I celebrate. Like we that's what we do as humans. We foster and augment the growth and secure those social ties by celebrating, not by talking about their imminent.
Right. And conservation has a very difficult history. So I happily drop it.
Right. Interesting. Well, we'll keep going. We'll keep going with that. But as we close this up, I think that's a wonderful sort of call to action. We have a, let's talk about that piece of paper you have in front of you there.
This is February 21st, 22nd of next year at our Great Resort Casino, believe it or not, Indigenous Co-Stewardship of Public Lands, Lessons for the Future. We will be convening of tribal leaders, Indigenous culture bearers, and public land management agencies from the United States, Canada, and Mexico. You'll learn about substantive long-term co-stewardship agreements, various things. You'll visit Point Reyes National Seashore, Tolay Lake Regional Park, and Bodega Marine Laboratory on traditional lands of the Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo. The invited speaker, Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland. So we're very excited about that. But one of the things,
can we all go?
Everybody can go. Yes, look it up.
Is there a place we register at, or
let's see.
Yeah, it will be on the California Biodiversity Network website. So just go right to
we'll
California
It's
Biodiversity
hosted,
Network.
yes, and I forgot to mention, it's hosted by California Biodiversity Network. And so thank you so much, Adina, because you go to that website and you can just register. It doesn't cost you anything.
But
Let's
it wouldn't
get
be
that up
possible without the Federated Indians of
That's
Great
for sure.
Manchuria. So we are in gratitude there as well.
I don't know if you can zoom in on this, but
Greg is not talking about it, but
over here.
if you can focus in on that, but it'll be on Instagram, Place and Purpose Live too.
Oh, great.
Oh, great.
Thank you, Obi, because
Yeah.
Obi does all the hard grunt work of this thing.
And one of the
program.
great, I mean, not only do we have gratitude for the help with the workshop and your connection with Deb Haaland, but also Secretary Haaland, that you have exemplified and showed how to do these co-management agreements. So it's a great opportunity for all of us to come and learn.
Well, one of the things in closing, and I just have to turn this back, we're talking about how we're different people and different perspectives. But wasn't it amazing, the thing we first started talking about? I don't think it was even, well, we did a little bit on air here, but all of us heard the frogs
This morning.
All of you heard those frogs. You don't know how many people come here and don't. I live with them, so they bark. They almost do this little bark, and so I'll be out there and they'll bark at me and they'll bark a little bit. I said, "Oh, hello, there you are." And of course, I'm so attuned to my land here. The first thing I thought, did that darn bobcat that's been hanging around here mess up my rock wall there, or did you guys do it? So you said, we didn't do it. We didn't. So I said, okay, I know who did it then. It was the bobcat.
We were a little bit late to start today because
Yeah.
Greg was building a wall,
Yes.
repairing his wall.
Yeah, the bobcat. He was here yesterday, and that we have a relationship where it's reminding me that it owns this place. I'll be sitting in my office window looking out. It'll walk up the path, look at me, back up to my front gate, urinate on the wall, and then look at me, and then just cock with very the way they walk away, swinging its butt back and forth, very cocky, saying, "Greg, in case you forgot, this place is mine." But it also does other things like will urinate against my front door, marking my front door of the house, and we'll just walk around. It's been quite a character.
And I'm sure you come back and say, and we're still here too.
Yes, yes.
Let's celebrate that.
No, you know what I think, Adina? Oh shit! Now I got to wash down the front porch. But I'm so I would cry if I lost him. We have this thing, and I said, we'll let each other live together.
Right. And when I'm thinking about my point about you still being here is that Native communities and their strength and resilience is where I draw a lot of hope for the future. That's
the thing. People right now, especially with all the horrible kinds of political stuff and woke stuff that's going on. And as a teacher, when I taught American Indian history, yes, the history in here in California, in particular, my tribe in particular, is quite ugly. But it's not to make people feel guilty. It's not to make another people feel proud or suddenly righteous. But it's about what happens when you look at people and an environment in a privileged way without any reflection about who and what you are. What happens? What can happen when we don't ask, why are they burning those hills instead of assuming they're doing it so that our cattle can't eat? We have to ask questions, learn from the history so that we don't repeat it with our very essential behaviors or cultured behaviors. Yeah. So, all of the stuff that we've lived through becomes an opportunity for growth, not a continued us-them.
Absolutely. And it harkens me back to question woman and answer woman in the stories of the mountain. I've always felt more comfortable on the question woman side of things.
Wait till you see what's coming out in April. The Forgetters, the question woman, answer woman are tell 10 parables about people who've left the mountain and various cultures and things who have forgotten the various eternal verities of nature and so forth of life and lessons to be learned.
Oh, and so let's the clothing on the floor, right? Don't leave your stuff on the floor.
Yeah. Right? Well, let's throw in a plug for Heyday Books then.
Yes,
Heyday
that's going to be
go become a member of Heyday Books, and you can get first pre-sale access to The Forgetters, which is coming out in April 2024, which is the 50th anniversary year of Heyday. My book on fire will be coming out in the fall. The State of Fire: Understanding Where, How, and Why California Burns.
You produce so fast, Obi.
And I'm so grateful for deserts.
What else am I going to do with my days?
One of our holes in the Naturalist Handbook is not enough information about deserts. So we're drawing on Obi's book.
I'm very grateful to the success that the deserts of California has achieved so far. I thought that book was going to really struggle with finding an audience because it is about, frankly, another planet than is this temperate place that is the California floristic province.
But the population's
arid
booming
lands,
there.
yes,
and they really want to learn more.
True. And
so
the whole issue of desertification.
Right, and contrasting that concept to what a mature and precious desert ecosystem is. The history of the high desert and the low desert across the Holocene is fascinating.
Oh, we need to come back together again and talk weather whiplash and all kinds of things we didn't cover.
Weather whiplash, it's true. It's true. That's the nature of these little discussions. This precious discussion that we just had. Thank you so much, Adina, for joining us today.
This has been great. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, exciting. Every time I have these, and Obi and I, we talk, like a few days before, just to kind of say, okay, what are we going to talk about? And then Obi and I just go off on these tangents until Angela says, Greg, you have to get off the phone. You've got something else to do.
Exactly.
Well, it's been such a gift for me. And I just want to say that when I first watched your very first podcast, I had this wish and dream that I would be in there as question woman, because I just I love both the work that both of you do. And then I got the email invitation. So for me, it's really a treat.
Adina, I was going to say, I might as well say it on air. I will send you a advance copy of the book so you can see the story.
Great.
Oh,
And
very good.
for those in the audience who don't know, maybe we should just mention that the three of us have collaborated, even if
Yes,
it's a little bit
yes.
remotely, but on that book. I started digging into the stories, but the art and art in the interludes.
I
in the
illustrated it, and Greg wrote the forward.
book, and
Yeah.
the forward about
And
Mabel
Obi
and her
informed me of that. I didn't even realize that. I don't
I think
know
you said I did a forward for Adina, but I don't know where it is.
I said something. Well, I did a forward, and Obi goes, "I did the artwork for that book." Yes, okay.
So we're all trying to be so
Because-
That's
productive
right.
that we
Beca-
forget how it all
Because
comes
I got
together.
the manuscript, but I didn't get the final book, so I didn't see Obi's artwork, so I didn't know.
So we should have really kicked off the show with
Sure.
the fact that we actually all collaborated on this book.
And
look
It was
what
a
it was
pleasure,
in
and I'm
collaboration.
It
grateful.
was in the voiceover. We're talking about the book Climate Stewardship, Taking Collective Action to Protect California. Now you can become a certified climate steward in California through UC Extension.
That's right.
Programs are open right now. Please go check it out. Please join us in the conversation. Now we have 20. This is our last episode of 2023. And we're moving into 2024. We've got lots of wonderful guests on the horizon. I've got nobody to announce right now because we're still rearranging the chairs, if you will. But Adina, thank you so much for joining us today on Place and Purpose.
Thank you. And thank all the participants who are watching the show, too. We really
Yeah.
appreciate your interest.
Oh, I would. Yeah, we got a winner. We have a winner. Oh, yeah, the winner of the episode's book giveaway today. If you go to placeandpurposelive.com, you can register your email and you can get a copy of my most recent book and Greg's most recent book. And the winner today is from Glasgow, Scotland,
Wow.
Andrea Adams.
Andrea,
I have never
thank
been
you
to
for-
Scotland. I want to go to Scotland.
Listen, yes.
Enjoy the reading, Andrea.
Yes.
Indeed. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for that. And do I have anything else to announce there, Jared? No, I got the thumbs up from our producer, and I guess with that we'll sign off.
Well, both of you, thank you for driving up the hill in this rain, the mountain in this rain.
That's right. That's right.
I actually love it when it rains.
Oh, I
up
love
here.
it too. I
Yeah.
love it too.
But you'll have to come back, Adina, and see. From here, you can see the ocean.
When I was driving up, I saw incredible views.
Oh,
Yeah, I had
yeah.
a little break.
And we're actually often here. It'll be clear down below, but we're in the clouds here. And then during the summer, we're in the fog. You're in the fog down there, but it's clear up here, and the heat's pushed up. So it's like when you come up the mountain, it's like going in a plane past the clouds. You just come right out of the fog into the clear.
I love Sonoma Mountain. We did
Yeah.
a lot of field studies
Oh,
on the
so
other
you know.
side, on
Okay.
the eastern side, but
Oh,
it's just
okay.
a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's a special
Yeah,
place.
for
It's the
sure,
best.
For sure. And I'm a big proponent of keeping it somewhat connected across some
Yes.
of those road
Well,
barriers.
that's why I have all these animals, because we have the preserve and all this open space, and there's no city or anything. So I've got the cougars, I've got everything here.
Right, right. But I really see it as you also have a connection. It's sort of a different scale, but thinking all the way to the yellow bellies. I mean, I
Yes,
really believe
yes.
that there's these core
Yeah.
woodlands and habitat that kind
Yeah.
of constantly
Yes.
supply offspring
Yeah.
that come all the way down here.
Over
So
here,
even
yes.
though that we see them sadly sometimes dead on the road and things like that, but it's still, in a sense, provides,
You must see what I see at night driving home about 10 o'clock at night on these roads. That's when I see them all.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, we'll see you in January. All right. Signing off
See
for now.
everybody in January.
Alrighty. Take care. Little epilogue discussion there.
Yes, yes.
I wasn't sure if we're on air or not.